Hey fellas, how you doing? We're going to be revisiting the Necrons today, talking about the weird deviant offshoots of them as a species, or rather what remains of them as a species. My two favorite aspects of Necron lore, the Destroyers and the Flayed ones. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, to be a Necron is already a fate worse than death, an ancient being disconnected from the senses they once had, many of them reduced to little more than husks, blindly following the orders of their betters. However, you could also argue that this lack of autonomy is also something of a blessing in disguise, as many of the more mundane Necron warriors have no real concept of how long they've been alive at this point. Now imagine you were trapped inside this metal husk and a part of you remembered what it was like to feel hunger. Feel a hunger that never really goes away. And that, my friends, is a flayed one. The ravenously hungry ghouls of the Necron people. Forever cursed with a hunger they can never even attempt to satiate. Looked upon as little better than feral dogs by their Necron brethren. Draped in the skin of their victims and driven into a frenzy at the sight of blood. They do not follow direct orders from Necron lords or overlords. They simply seem to possess a sixth sense that allows them to know when their brethren are in combat, and act as light skirmishers to harass the enemy from behind their own lines, eager to tear into their flesh. They have modified their living metal necrodermis bodies to give their legs an extra joint to increase their agility, and turned their fingers into razor-sharp blades. It is said that the Flayer curse was put upon the Necron people by one of the Satan, the so-called star gods that taught the Necrons the process of biotransference, trapping them in their necrodermis shells for all eternity. The Satan in question being Landu Gor the Flayer. However, I would like to posit a simpler and, in my opinion, more terrifying theory. That the Flayer curse is just an unforeseen side effect of biotransference. A lingering memory of what it was like to be a flesh and blood creature and the need to consume flesh to survive, just cranked up to an obsessive degree. The largest known concentration of the flayed ones being the Bone Kingdom of Drazak and the Ghoul Stars, where these mad degenerates are ruled over by a fallen Necron overlord known as Volghoul, who will send his people out on great hunts in times where the flesh runs low, and the flayed ones grow restless fighting over what few scraps remain. The Ghoul Stars being the home system of a strange Xenos race known as the Scythor Fiends, who bear a striking resemblance to the Necron flayed ones in my opinion. Creatures believed to have been eliminated twice by both the Death Spectres and the Black Templar Space Marines chapters, and have on rare occasions been found among the forces of chaos. Perhaps it's just an unrelated coincidence. Perhaps the original flayed ones modeled their design after the Scythor Fiends. Who can say for sure? As the hunger of the flayed ones is insatiable, sending them up against enemies such as the Orcs and the Tyranids seems like the most optimal way to use them in a Necron army, as they will have near unlimited sources of flesh to feast upon. And as the Silent King himself knows all too well, these enemies must be eliminated at all costs. And it's safe to say that the flayed ones would be purged if biotransference into new organic vessels were to ever be achieved. The Necron Destroyers are a nihilistic doomsday cult that have spiraled off of the Necron armies, their sole remaining imperative in their existence being to eliminate all organic life in the galaxy. And they have gone to the extremes of augmenting their bodies to achieve this, often replacing their legs with grav lifts and one of their arms with a gauze cannon, making them essentially living light tanks. More often than not, Necron Destroyers were immortals or even Lichguard prior to their self-inflicted transformations, and often fight in hosts of 3 Necron Destroyers or 3 Necron Heavy Destroyers led by a Necron Destroyer Lord, a member of the Necron aristocracy that has joined the cult and assumed a role of leadership within it. Known as a host of the Red Harvest, it is next to impossible to make them retreat. For as long as organic life exists, they feel the need to destroy it. And there was also a relatively new variant of the Necron Destroyer introduced, the Scorpec Destroyer, who choose to use spider-like appendages instead of the modified grav lifts. These are faster, more melee-focused destroyer units that can be added to any Necron army, although they are still devout members of the cult. While it isn't specifically stated in the lore, I would like to assume that a more traditional Necron destroyer was an immortal, and the Scorpex were Lich Guards in their past lives. That seems to make the most sense to me personally. Now, if you want to believe that the Flayed One curse and the Destroyer madness are a byproduct of the Satan's meddling, then be my guest to believe that. But personally, I find another theory much more disturbing. And I would even argue it's a little more grounded when you dig into the psychology of beings like ourselves. How a single-minded mania can drive people to some very odd extremes. Take a hoarder, for example. Their anxiety manifests in a desire to keep everything they've ever touched within reach, and will often result in them living in mountains of their own trash and filth. Or how somebody with obsessive-compulsive disorder can sometimes feel compelled to wash their hands until they bleed, still believing they aren't clean enough. And then tell me again that you really need an otherworldly influence on these creatures to understand where their mania might come from. Hell, spend 5 minutes on Instagram and scroll through other people's body dysmorphia and you'll really understand where a Necron destroyer is coming from. Replacing their arm with a Gauss cannon is basically their equivalent of juicing. And as anyone with an eating disorder can tell you, the Necron flayed ones aren't too far off from the market either. I myself have struggled with binge eating junk food in the past during times of high anxiety to the point I got an official diagnosis. The idea of having this insatiable hunger you can never quite quench is a lot more relatable than a lot of people would want to think it is. And in my opinion is much scarier than having it be the result of some magical gods that are dead. Just an unforeseen consequence of a desperate action of a dying people, manifesting in a grim and ghoulish way. Hell, ask any former alcoholic or smoker if they ever still get the itch for their vice of choice, and they'll tell you that they do. And you could easily transfer that onto the Necron Flayed One's obsession with flesh and bones. Again, just cranked up to an insane degree because this is Warhammer 40k we're talking about. Anyway, that's all I got for this one, fellas. Thanks for watching. Likes, comments, and even if you're feeling a little frisky, you can go ahead and subscribe if you aren't already. It's always appreciated on this end. You guys have a good one, you hear? Or else.